when I say those things out loud, I'm like, those are going to make for great lines in the big short book of the Canadian real estate market.
All right, today we've got Dan Foch. Dan is a real estate agent. Him and I went to university together. That's how we met. He's become a real estate personality on Twitter and social media, runs his own podcast, and just an interesting guy to follow. So thought I'd have him in and have a conversation. So you're saying you're getting more traction from any little political take you have?
Yeah.
Is it more even than your real estate takes?
100%. Yeah, my real estate takes don't get anything.
Really?
Yeah. Unless they're like, well, no, they have to be political. It's about housing. I'm probably the only person from our university program that uses the housing part of our degree. What
do you mean by that?
I've functionally become a housing analyst because I'm a young realtor and I produce a lot. Mm-hmm. I'm in touch with the needs of the market. And I can see, I just watched, I think it was 2-3 months into COVID. I remember I sold a detached house to a pair of first time home buyers. And I was like, this is the last detached house that I'm ever going to sell in the GTA to first time home buyers. And I was almost right. But the second batch that bought, they had their parents giving them $250,000 or something like that.
Sure.
Right. So it's maybe a different story.
So I see what you mean now, the housing aspect, which is inexorably the political aspect.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we call it real estate, and people in the people who are realtors want to say oh, we're real estate professionals. It's no, you sell houses, you're a housing provider. You're somewhere in the housing supply chain, right? Mm-hmm. People want to make it sound like real estate because everybody wants to sound like a professional services company or something, right?
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, we sell houses.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. We met in the University of Guelph Real Estate and Housing program.
Right. Which is now just the real estate program.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think, or maybe even real estate finance or something like that.
Okay. That makes a lot more sense. I would have benefited a lot more from a program like that, I think.
Right. Yeah. And there wasn't really a huge housing component either, but there was enough housing analysis, regression, some of the valuation stuff that helped me be in touch with that as an add value to clients, I guess, right now. They just want somebody who is in touch with what the market could do, right?
Right.
It's weird that realtors are your microeconomic analysts right now in the market because we're the only people who have data. Our housing, they've just created such an information asymmetry in real estate, right? And that's what protects realtors.
Well, and micro as well as macro now. I mean, everyone has to be a macroeconomist or a geopolitical frickin' analyst. It all affects everyone. I mean, to go back to that, give the people a little bit of a description of kind of what you do now,
right?
What you did out of university, and then how it led to you being now, kind of a figure or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. So I mean, right now I primarily sell houses. I would say, before COVID, I was about 50-50 between commercial and residential real estate. I mean, and I used to just work on kind of weird deals, like the racetrack being a good example, right? Mm-hmm. Just stuff that nobody else could sell, package it in a weird way, and sell it. And COVID, so a lot of that became me doing secondary plan land assemblies. So you take a small town, Milton being a good example, a lot of the houses on the main roads are now upzoned kind of in the secondary plan. So if you can put together a land assembly of 4 or 5 houses into an acre, you can flip those out to a developer and they can build a small project there. COVID happened and basically the marginal buyer, so first time home buyer, started paying more money for one of those houses on a main road than a developer possibly could.
Right.
And so a lot of the product I had just started shifting towards people selling houses buying houses. And I guess just gradually I started selling and transacting more houses and kind of used my experience and the background that I had in analysis to create value for people who are looking to purchase houses or who own houses currently. And a lot of that came down to economic analysis, right? Is prices going up or are they going down?
So did you do a podcast and you do these, I guess, Twitter kind of conferences and stuff like that, and Twitter and Instagram. Is that something you see as separate from trying to buy and sell houses, or is it just kind of something you like? What was your goal when you started that, or have you always wanted to have influence?
Yeah, I don't think I did it for influence so much as just to like learn myself. Like, and that's why I started the podcast to like, I want to know, to be honest with you, like one of my goals is to be one of the most knowledgeable people in the world about real estate, right? Like when the way that you describe your brother with that car, that specific car, I would love to be that person with real estate, maybe just Canadian real estate. And I think like it's within reach, right? Like I could probably accomplish that in my lifetime. And so when I decided to start on that journey, it was like, why not document that? Because the shit that I'm learning is valuable to everyone, right? And the housing dialogue and the discourse around how we're going to solve this housing crisis in Canada is something that everybody needs to hear and to be a part of, right? And so that's really all that I did. And then I think that the Twitter thing just kind of happened because I think people, like, I was getting so many questions and we were having like these really big threads on Twitter, and I was like, these conversations are becoming so elaborate that they need to happen in person. Totally. And regularly. And so like that, you know, now like the whole Twitter Toronto real estate community is focused around this concept of mortgage fraud. And I mean, it was kind of brought on as an, you know, I had this hypothesis. I don't know if you watched The Big Short or read the book at the beginning.
Yeah, I read the book.
Yeah. So at the beginning, Michael Burry is quoting, you know, that I can't remember the exact thing that he says, but you know, that it's a sign of a bubble, or you can anticipate a bubble in hindsight because the complexity and frequency of fraud starts increasing, right? And so, and mortgage fraud apparently is starting, you know, and soft mortgage fraud, but people falsifying income documents is apparently ramping up like crazy in the Canadian real estate market, right? And so it's like, to me, like, I've been bearish on real estate for far too long, and I've been wrong for far too long. And I actually, this is probably the first year that I've been like, I mean, at this point, I've capitulated as a bear and just been like, I actually think prices are just going to go up indefinitely because the government wants to encode that there. I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, so back that up. Why? I mean, to be bearish, you'd say that there's a bubble here, and that it's going to burst because of, you know, I guess looking historically, we were just born in the 90s when that bubble did burst in the GTA. Yeah. And it hasn't happened since.
Yeah, I think prices have grown in a relatively straight line, you know, save for 2017, since then, like 25 years of price growth. And when you start to see years like where you're seeing double-digit price growth, I mean, you're like, I think recoil is probably a pretty appropriate thing to expect.
Sure.
But I guess the question is like, you know, okay, let's say you see a recoil of 20%. I mean, that's not even a meaningful enough correction. Like that brings us back to prices of October of last year, 2021, right?
Which is insane. Yeah. So now explain why you think it's just what they're just going to, okay, I won't put words in your mouth, but why you think prices are going to go up indefinitely.
I don't know. I don't know if I actually think that is the case, but I do think that the government wants it to be the case. I think that they've lost control and that they're trying as hard as they can to keep control. But I think that at the end of the day, the invisible hand is going to do what it's going to do. Interest rates are inversely correlated with housing, right? Or prices of most assets. So the reality is, you know, is there something that they can do that's powerful enough to offset the
low interest rate atmosphere?
Yeah. Or powerful enough to, as we see interest rates rising, like interest, you know, the overnight rate just doubled, right? It went from 0.25 to 0.5%. We've never seen that happen in history. Not that it matters, but it's not hard to imagine a world in which the current capital costs that a first-time home buyer who bought their house at the beginning of COVID, who has to renew their mortgage in 5 years, they could be paying double, right? Unless, and I think that what they're likely to do is, you know, increase interest rates, cause a recession, and then start to decrease rates to try and pull us out of the recession. I think the challenge from my perspective is that, you know, we've fundamentally broken the monetary system in Canada, right? And so it's like, how do you recover from that? And I think the answer might be that you don't, right?
Right. Do you want to explain that a little bit? Like what kind of numbers we're talking about as far as what they printed?
Yeah, sure. So I believe I think we've tripled the size of our monetary supply in Canada through the balance sheet. I mean, it's not technically like monetary supply because a lot of it's like paper gains and whatever it is, but you know, through quantitative easing. And quantitative easing from my perspective is actually a really great tool economically, but it works better in economies that have businesses. And we don't have a lot of those in Canada. We're a very oligopolistic economy. You have 5 telcos, 5 banks, right? And so when in the US, if you buy bonds to create money to give it to a business, like Ruth's Chris Steakhouse would probably be the earliest example of somebody who was pulled up for out of COVID, kind of because they were shut down as a steakhouse, right? Dining was...
What happened there? I don't know the exact example.
They were on the brink of bankruptcy. I think it was right in March of 2020. Okay. And so a bond repurchase basically saved them and in 2008, like this was actually a great tool for the US government to make money, because they, as a result of all of these bonds that they were purchasing off of businesses, the businesses were paying them the bonds back when they came due, plus an interest rate. Mm-hmm. And that helped to repatriate a lot of that capital that was pushed out into the market, and it helped them, the government, to actually start earning income to start paying back their sovereign debt. In Canada, the story is different because, there's only so many places you can put that money, or there's only so many companies that you can buy bonds from. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of cases, those are chartered banks. And chartered banks, once they have a lot of money, what do? They lever it up and lend it out, right? So one of the first, I think the primary response to COVID was actually they decreased the capital requirement on the books from those chartered banks from 2.5%, I believe, to 1.25%. Okay. So effectively allowing banks to lend out twice as much money as they previously could with a lower capital requirement. And that's sort of how you end up where we are, right? Like, you've just created an incentive for a bunch of chartered banks that are considered globally systemic. Like, the Canadian banking system is so, I guess, oligopolistic, but also so
integrated.
Yeah.
With
you have TD in the States, Scotia all over the world too. They're big in investment banking. And so I think that we've got this hubris that's developed, right? We're feeling a little bit invincible. Maybe not wrong.
Well, I mean, I look at it like I was looking at, I think Canada almost matched the US in what they did in the last, call it 2 years now, increasing the M1 money supply by 400%.
Right. Okay.
The stat is 80% of all US dollars in circulation were created in the last 2 years.
Right.
Like, that's not quantitative easing. That is uncharted experimental territory.
Right. For sure.
Like, so, it's tough for me to believe that they did that naively.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the challenge is that modern monetary theory is still just a theory, right?
Right.
And so maybe...
So they did it hubristically then? I guess,
yeah. I mean, I think that they're just saying, on paper, MMT works, and maybe we're just wrong here, right? Like, we're about to find out.
Well, I mean, it works for the people who own assets, right? And they have this huge increase in their asset price. I don't want to say value, because the value is just all that it is. You can live there or you don't. Yeah. But it just kills the poorest people. Yeah.
I mean, and that's a global phenomenon, right? Like, they've created this. This is my biggest concern with MMT as a response to COVID, especially. You've inflated asset prices and encoded this K-shaped recovery, right? Where you've pushed, and this is sort of what I mean when I say we've broken the monetary economy or the monetary system, is like, when you inflate the value of assets of people who are holding them, that money is money you could never get. Like, there's no way that ever could get recirculated. All it does is increases capital hoarding. It's not like people who are already wealthy are going to go out and spend all of that money. Yeah, like maybe now they can afford a yacht or a private jet or a collection of cars or whatever, but they're still going to keep a large percentage of that just locked up and earning a yield, right? Yep. And so it doesn't actually benefit the economy until it needs to get into circulation. And the way that it can circulate better, which is what we're learning right now, is through inflation. The cost of everything goes up, right? Because the number of people bidding and the aggregate buying power of all of those people bidding has increased by, like you're saying, 400%. Yeah. This is where I think, maybe the most likely outcome, I think we already are facing a class war in Canada. Mm-hmm. I don't know how quickly that becomes actually an active thing, but I don't think you've ever felt a period in time where people have felt so divided, be it through things that were discussed prior to COVID, but now I think economically, right? I don't see how that ends well for, especially a nation like Canada, where, you know, before COVID, everyone was middle class, or they felt middle class because we had access to credit. Like, you know, you drive through a city in the States and you don't see the road full of, you know, Mercedes and BMWs and whatever. But here it's like that.
Yep.
And I think that's gone. And so I don't know who, you know, as a country that depends so heavily on immigration, I don't know what we're selling to people to come here anymore, right? They're going to show up. They're going to show up to Canada or to Toronto and say, okay, I'm going to make $60,000 in my job, and I'm going to spend, you know, 80% of that to service a mortgage. Yep. So I don't see how it works. It's not sustainable.
So you, I think early in COVID, you had posted a graph that showed the exodus of the city, and that was a pretty neat little graphic. Tell me about kind of how COVID hit, obviously in the downtown core, and it was probably not fun to live in Toronto. What happened, and then since COVID has now kind of officially ended, has it come back?
Yeah, I think we're just starting to see it come back. Like, that's sort of the big media story right now, is the reurbanization of demand, I guess you would call it. I think that it's going to happen, and it's going to happen pretty quickly, provided that, you know, we don't, like, that the government is actually in agreement that we're reopening the economy, because there's been so many kind of you know, false starts, right? But I think that suburbs are really what's going to suffer, right, price wise.
You mean they'll increase?
No, I think they'll take a hit.
Yeah,
they'll take a hit.
So when COVID hit, not everyone, I'm generalizing.
But a good portion of the population.
Explain what happened.
Yeah, so basically, like, you were starting to see, the only way that I could really find a data point that would demonstrate what was happening was by basically pinpointing the real estate agent's office address, because you know what agent sold the property, and then where they were traveling to sell a property. And those lines kept getting bigger month by month. Agents from Toronto were driving to, you know, to Keswick, to Milton, to Muskoka to transact real estate. So, you know, I mean, typically that would evidence that people were moving out. And I think that we started to see that. You could see it in just the price inflation that was happening. You know, Toronto condos, as an example, went up, you know, maybe between 4 to 11% over those 2 years. And suburban homes, I mean, this is the problem we're dealing with right now, right? You've seen markets, Bancroft, Ontario went up like 90% year over year, right? Like, yeah, so, you know, and Durham is about the same thing. I think since the beginning of COVID the prices have almost doubled, right? So some areas have tripled, especially like affordable housing areas, you know, you're like Oshawa, places where first-time home buyers are buying. And a lot of it was because, you know, people were acting impulsively. They were like, this is going to change the world forever. We're going to work from home forever. A lot of people think that even if we end up reopening the central business district, we'll end up with a hybrid model, which I actually would believe. I think that that's a pretty strong thesis. And I think that the central business district is changed forever, right? I just don't think we know what it looks like until, you know, maybe a year from now, and we start figuring out what role Toronto plays, you know, when you have 50% vacancy in the office world, right?
Do you think there's some sort of solution there, you know, where someone can drive 2 hours from the city, or at the beginning of COVID, they could anyways, and buy what was, you know, $100,000, whatever, $200,000 cottage,
right,
live there, work remotely? Like, will there be some, you know, decentralization where people can just work remotely in these small towns in Ontario or all across Canada, or, you know, where now they don't have to pay exorbitant rates to, you know, buy a condo in Toronto?
Yeah, I think that you would hope so, but then also that might not be exceptionally bullish for, you know, for Canadians, the Canadian working class either, because I think if it's easy for you to work for, you know, RBC, whose head office is downtown 1 or 2 days a week, and then the remainder at your cottage in Bancroft, Ontario, it's just as easy for somebody offshore to do that. And,
sure.
And we don't, you know, I mean, I don't know how that looks, but you're starting to see more and more of that happening. So I think that, like, not that I care, I would love to see a much more decentralized Canadian economy. I think that, you know, anything that we can introduce to progress ourselves especially in that direction, is going to help. I just don't think it might not end up being the best thing. I think you'll start to see protectionism, I guess is what I'm trying to say, like around Canadian jobs, around stuff like that. Like I think because I especially, I think we get 100 basis points on the prime rate and we're going to be in a pretty crippling recession probably. I would say that's going to take us about a year.
So I was going to ask you that, explain in layman's terms how many rate hikes are going to have to happen. So, do it in like an average 5-year fixed rate or something. When do you think that really starts to affect home prices?
I think it already has, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it did to the positive in most of our spring market demand. Typically your spring market peaks in April, May.
Okay.
And you'll often see like a big bump in price because people are buying bigger homes in the spring. Families tend to transact in the spring, so your 4 bedrooms are selling then, and so it's just a composition bias, right? So your price looks highest in the spring.
Sure.
Because they all want to transact in the summer between the school years. I think that what happened was everybody was talking in December, early January about, and I guess it was January 23rd was the first potential rate hike announcement.
Yep.
That we were going to see a rate hike, and it didn't happen, but a lot of people rushed in to buy. And then it was like, okay, well, if it didn't happen then it's going to happen in the February rate hike announcement. And it did at that point, but everybody who needed to, or who felt compelled to, again, like I think the challenge is the average consumer doesn't necessarily know the impacts of these capital costs. And that's a problem within itself, I think, with the Canadian financial education system. But, I think there was a lot of people rushing into that market. And I think most data would tell us that the Canadian real estate market, the spring market, happened in February, probably early February. I think, Jason Billingsley from Zillow, the CEO of Zillow, founder, mentioned it might have peaked probably February 10th was when search, because they have probably the most robust search volume in Canadian real estate, right? Okay. Everybody is searching Zillow on their phone for houses, not realtor.ca.
Really?
Yeah, oh yeah. Clients will send me like listings being like, I want to see this, and it's a Zillow listing, right? Yeah, they've really captured the market. But yeah, so they would have the best insight, I would say, on Canadian real estate data. And to me, that's when the market peaked, and you're starting to see the effects of it. So today is, the week after March break. Typically this is when the spring market would start, and it's pretty well crickets right now out there in the market, anecdotally, but based on my experience in the suburbs, at least, now you're seeing a lot of volume happening in the condo market in Toronto, right? It's stronger than it's been in the past 2 years. So, it's kind of telling the story. People are they're reurbanizing. They're thinking about that, and they're buying condos and they're selling the suburban house.
Interesting. So they're coming back. I mean, there's a lot of places we can go. What do you think that because of COVID in the GTA, and maybe explain this a little bit to someone, say they're from Florida, like the GTA is this unique bubble. Immigration is a huge component of the demand for housing. During COVID, what happened with immigration, and then what are they going to do now? And do you think it's going to have a big effect?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thought. I think that we're going to have trouble attracting the type of immigrants that can afford to live in the GTA. I really feel that way. Okay. I think that, and I don't think that has anything to do with Canada's failures, politically or socially or economically. I think that other countries just have a much more compelling value proposition to a lot of the high demand groups, and I think that there's no way that we can win the hearts of those people, or the dollars of those people. I think, and a lot of OECD nations, a lot of Commonwealth nations are ramping up immigration as a result of, trying to fix their own economic problems that happened as a result of COVID. So, the UK has I think doubled their immigration program. A lot of European nations are seeing it. The Ukraine crisis, or the war happening right now, is probably going to change a lot of immigration policy around the world from a refugee perspective. I don't think immigration is the bull case for Canadian real estate that people think it is. You're already seeing, I'm very limited on like my understanding of exactly how all the scoring systems work for people, but basically there's like the one that is most notable to me is the CRS system. I don't even know what it stands for, but the scores, the immigration scores actually dropped like right off.
So what is that? The score of like, what is it? Economic ability of a potential immigrant?
Yeah. Like their potential to be successful in the Canadian economy, I think, within the job market and how their career would fit in well, et cetera. And so I think that you're at risk of bringing in a bunch of people who can't afford to live here and exacerbating the housing crisis and that's creating a problem. Like, to me, that's a social crisis. If you're basically saying, hey, come on over and then, be impoverished, like that's not appropriate.
No.
and that's not a good look, especially for people, for the current administration, which really prides themselves on being providers of, good social care. And then I think that the other element is, I don't think we just don't have, like, we already have a housing crisis. So it's bad. It's just.
Explain that. Unpack that for someone who's down in Florida.
Right.
Like, what is our housing crisis?
Right. Yeah. So we just have an extreme excess demand, right? Like we already have too few houses for Canadians to live in. And in a lot of cases, or in certain areas, I guess you could say, but I would say across the country, there's not enough houses for Canadians to live in. We can't build them fast enough to ease that. And so you have an oversubscription or an excess demand. And so that has driven the price up, right? Mm-hmm. If there's lots of people fighting for the same thing, then they start paying more money for that thing. And especially when it's a good that's necessary to survive, right? Like food, water, shelter. And you're starting to see the same thing happen in the food space, right? And so what the challenge is, you can shut off the excess, or at least you can shut off what would add to the excess demand, which is immigration, right? You could say, yeah, we're not going to immigrate anybody for a couple of years, or you could shut off the buying power by decreasing the interest rate, which is kind of the phase that we're currently in, right? Mm-hmm. But you only really have so many tools that you can use, and immigration clearly isn't one of them. They're actually ramping up immigration at the moment. And regardless of whether or not that's a positive move for the government to do, I don't see it ending the way that they think it's going to. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't think it's a thesis that's been exceptionally well thought out.
Yeah, I mean, when you you think about it in just bare bones terms, you have your graph and you have supply and you have demand. You can do all you want to demand, but you're not taking people out of the country. You're not decreasing demand. People are still being born and Canadians all still live here. You have to do something to supply. Do you agree? Yeah, I would agree. But I think that, like, we're building at record pace, right? Are we? Yeah. So, I mean, like if you were to just say in its most simplistic sense, like, yeah, maybe all of the people that we're immigrating for the next 2 years should be skilled trades, as an example, right? Sure. Like, maybe that would get us closer to solving the problem. I guess it's just not as easy as that. I don't know. Like, I really, I wish I did. I wish I understood it better, but I don't really know. But you look at, the Affordable Housing Task Force report that the Ford government released a couple of weeks ago now. I think it was in early February. They basically want to take the keys away from the municipality on planning, which we can talk about. I think that could expedite supply a little bit. But then a lot of what they're talking about is training more skilled trades and immigrating more skilled trades. The challenge is the province isn't really who dictates who gets immigrated, right? Right. But I think that that's a step in the right direction, or at least we're having the conversation that's necessary to ease some of the struggle here. Like, if you're bringing people to Canada, they need a place to live, but if they can also contribute to building places to live, it helps, right? So, but I see this disconnect now where, it's not like, say you're in whatever, Kitchener or wherever, and housing doubled in the last year. No one's wages doubled. The average wage earner didn't double their wages. So how do those people, like, and even if interest rates, I guess, go up to some degree, like, the amount, the pill that the Canadian homeowner has to take to make housing affordable, in some cases is like 100-200% decrease in home price, so that an average wage earner can afford this. Like, there has to be a creation of affordable housing. Right. Yeah. I mean, and it's more challenging today than it ever was, right? Like, lumber's going up again, so construction costs are inflationary. I mean, until we can, again, free up and I'm sure, like, some guys in the construction space, like,
you can't even, you're booking years out for some of these construction contracts, right? Like it's not easy. Everybody thinks developers are making like tons of money. Like their margins are airtight.
Yep.
Right. And in a lot of cases, they're canceling projects or asking owners to pony up the dough because they literally can't afford to bring a product to market. And so, okay, like if we can't expect developers to socialize the cost of building affordable housing, which, I mean, they're probably the ones who could afford it. Realistically, a lot of those guys are doing pretty well. But I actually think that, if I were to examine what's going on right now and I were to guess what's going on behind the scenes and what data the government has that they're not telling us and what problem that we don't know about that they're trying to solve, I would say that the pension system is probably on the brink of failure. Mm-hmm. And the easiest way to ease that pressure is to make boomers asset rich. And so from my perspective, that is, and to say it in this way is like pointing the finger, but it also to me, it's like you have to socialize that cost in some way. And I think that we've sort of arrived at, Canada's a very socialistic economy, and maybe that's okay, maybe it's not. I mean, but I think that somebody has to pay the cost of that. And
right.
And right now it's whoever's going to buy those houses off of the boomers. And a good portion of that is the boomers' kids, it's mm-hmm. millennials, it's Gen Zs, but another portion of that is people that are immigrating to Canada. Right. So I think that they've created this, we've arrived at this very precarious position where, I mean, our economy's almost become a housing Ponzi scheme, right? Like, you bring more people in, they purchase the product goes up, and then you bring more people in. At some point, the music has to stop on that. Or like you eventually end up with an economy that just doesn't work. Like, it's not like we're diversifying into precious metals or minerals mm-hmm. or whatever, which we have a ton of, right? But like, I think that we've just completely ignored that, you can grow the economy, the monetary system, you can grow the population system, but at some point, all of those people have to economize. And, when we come to that realization, I just hope it's not too late, right? Because that to me is how things get really ugly. That's how you end up like Japan, where you lose a full decade of economic progress, right? Or more.
Yeah. I mean, we have this discussion all the time. I don't, we are in such experimental territory. I don't see the way out, or is it just like, or is it something to do now with the currency where the Canadian dollar becomes so weak?
Right.
Like there's no foreigners buying the Canadian debt.
It is interesting to see how that's kind of already taking place, right? I think that the Canadian dollar is sort of decoupled from oil a little bit, right? Like the Canadian dollar should be very strong right now given oil prices, and it's not as strong as it should be. And I think that that's because the world has realized that our economy is dependent on housing, right?
Mm-hmm. What percentage of the Canadian economy, is housing?
So I've seen estimates anywhere from like 50 to like 66, high 60%. I mean, because if you think about like construction, realtor commissions, financing, which is like our entire banking system is like lending mortgages, right? Yep. Like it could be, it could be even higher than that. But there's really no way to know because, a lot of that stuff's just buried but yeah, I would say it's probably the majority of our economy. I think like what else are we really doing? Oil and some precious metals, some softwood lumber, electricity, right? Like these are all things that we just sell to this is the thing about Canada. We sell everything to other people, right? Like we sell our resources to the state so they can sell them back to us mm-hmm. more expensively. We sell housing to, primarily, not primarily, but I think the objective here is to grow our housing market through immigration. I think that's become clear here, right? Mm-hmm. And it's worked historically, but I think that there comes a point where you no longer can attract immigration because it's not compelling anymore. And I think we're pretty close to that point.
So in your mind, what would it take for the Canadian government to, if they wanted to correct the absolute run that we've had on housing, what would interest rates have to go to? And if that's the mechanism, or is there some sort of other lever they can pull?
Interest rates are interesting because it at least buys us a little bit of time, right? Like, the average person's in, let's say, a 5-year mortgage term. They can probably check their renewal box unless they're in a huge equity hole. so, in 5 years, maybe they're okay, but maybe they try and trade in and out of the market, similar to the 90s, right? Like some of that took some time to come out in the wash. But I think what we're going to see is we'll see policy introduction, especially after today's announcement with Jagmeet and Justin Trudeau. Basically.
Yeah, explain that one.
Yeah, so they basically formed I don't even remember what the exact term is, but sort of an alliance where it would be unallowable, or they would vote against another election at the end of Justin Trudeau's original 4-year term, because there was a snap election in 2021. So basically, Justin Trudeau's current government and in coalition, I guess now with the NDP, will survive until 2025, which would be, I guess, the end of his. Like it's creating a new term off of that 2021 election. Mm-hmm. Which is fine, but I think that now it's interesting, because now they don't have an election to win in 2 years. So right. This is where, if you're going to start to see some haymaker policies, it's going to be very soon, right? So they're not. So you're saying they're not concerned about getting reelected, so they could actually potentially try and tackle this problem. Right.
And then the only type of people who have tackled this problem historically have been guys like Reagan with Milton Friedman at his side saying, right. An Austrian economist saying, no, we have to increase interest rates. Right. There's going to be, 5-year minimum pain. Mm-hmm. And then it gets fixed. Do you see Trudeau doing something like that?
No, but I think that the Bank of Canada is going to have to follow suit on the Fed, and I think the Fed needs to cap inflation. I mean, they're honest about, or more honest than we are about inflation in the U.S. I mean, there's no way that Canadian inflation is 5% no. Right? So, I think it's challenging here, because you've really, I think the average consumer isn't really being told the full story. But
do you think at this point, do you think the average consumer even believes that inflation in Canada is 5% when they fill up their car every day, when they go to the grocery store, when they see housing prices?
No, there's no way that they do.
Yeah.
I think the challenge is, like, we're not the type of people, not yet at least, to be pissed off enough about it. But I think that can change pretty quickly when you start to introduce financial stress to people, and those financial stresses are directly directly correlated to problems created by your government or mismanagement of the financial economy, and that's why I do think, like, I think that the comment that I made in the video that I said I posted on the way here, was that they basically made the decision to take the risk that they're adding more Gen Zs to the voting pool by pushing the election, because more of them will become, as 18 you have to vote in Canada, so okay. More Gen Zs are going to turn 18. Gen Zs are, like, every Gen Z in Canada right now is like, I'm never going to afford a house. Like, you go on TikTok and you listen to the discourse that's happening around housing, and it's like, it's depressing, right?
Really?
Yeah. And so and nobody is dismissing that the current administration is 100% responsible for that, yeah. Right? Like, so they're taking a huge risk. And I actually think that, Gen Z would have been the most likely to elect a populist, and probably a more socialistic populist. I think Jagmeet Singh, being the individual who is doing very well on TikTok, very popular with young people, and having a lot of those socialistic populist tendencies for that group of people, he would have had a shot. I don't know if he does now as a result of this, but I think that the Liberals are trying to buy themselves 2 more years to figure it out, right?
Right.
And how they're going to convince Gen Z that they're sorry, and maybe they do that by causing a housing crash. I don't know, but I think that if they're ever, I don't until today, I didn't believe that there was any likelihood that they would do it. Now I think that they could do it within the next 2 months and try their best to make everybody forget about it by the next election.
Wow.
And they could say, oh, hey, Gen Z, we did that for you. That's why you got to vote for us, because you can afford a house now.
Interesting.
Right. And this is the thing, like, in Canada, this is why, like, I was saying, like, more people interact with my political takes than anything else, but it's because like politics and housing are the last election was almost primarily about housing, right? And housing affordability. The next election is going to be 100% about housing affordability, right?
So that's what kind of drew you into politics. I mean, everyone is becoming more and more, one for sure you see in Ontario, everyone's becoming more and more, and maybe that's just because we're turning 30 or right around there. Everyone's on top of their own little real estate market. Like everyone's following it. You know, it's become appified almost to look at it. But I guess the same goes because it's such a central issue. I guess the same goes for politics as well, because politics is spilled into every...
Right. Well, and they're the same thing here, right? Yeah. Like, I mean, we don't have, like, our real estate economy is so heavily regulated. The supply chain is so heavily regulated that you have to involve it in the political conversation, right? Like, there's the United States, like, you want to you buy a piece of land in Texas, you want to build something on it, just do it.
Yep.
Right? Just make sure it's not going to fall over. Like, go drop off your engineered drawings, and then they're going to give you a building inspection. You know, not that I think that that's maybe the way that we should do things here, but, you know, it's an alternative, right? Texas is a pretty solid economy, and not that that's why, but it's because they don't have to focus all this time, energy, and bullshit on figuring out how to house their population and not make everybody go bankrupt. So I think the other thing is, like, the reason everybody is always talking about housing is because it's a magnitude issue, right? Like, if housing goes up 10%, you just lost, you know, like, because the prices were already so high, you just lost $100,000 of buying power or, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Or in most cases, 10% of someone's net worth.
Right.
Because it's almost all tied up in their house.
Right. And so that's why I think it's such a big part of the conversation. And it's not just, I don't think it's just because we're, you know, in our 30s and doing new household formation and whatever. I think, like, you're seeing the same conversations happening in Gen Z, and you're seeing the same conversations happening in baby boomers.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Like, baby boomers are like, my kid's never going to be able to live near me unless they live in my basement apartment. And Gen Zs are like, literally like, I need to start applying for my visa to move to the United States soon. Otherwise, I'm basically going to be a serf for the rest of my life, right?
You're not wrong. Yeah.
So I don't know how you move forward as an economy like that.
So you were saying that you can't see Canada, you know, they have to follow suit with the Fed. What do you think the U.S. is going to do to curb their inflation? I mean, like, again, like I was saying, what they've done is insane.
Yeah.
You know, if you believe that inflation, and, you know, inflation is not caused by Putin in the last 2 weeks. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Inflation is caused by printing money, period.
Right. Yeah.
So what do you think they're going to do?
Well, I think, I mean, Jerome Powell seems to be taking I think he's probably more now than ever aligned with the actual mandate of the Federal Reserve, which is to control inflation, right? You know, he's saying a 50 basis point hike isn't off of the table. I do think that Canada will trail the Fed a little bit, because I think we want a bit of a weak Canadian dollar, again, to try and incentivize a little bit of immigration and incentivize a little bit of affordable housing, or foreign direct investment. Because, you know, a weak Canadian dollar means people are buying at a bit of a discount here. And so it wouldn't surprise me if we're trailing them by 1 or 2 hikes, let's say, right? So 50 basis point spread at maximum. I think we're already at 25 basis point spread. I would say Powell's probably going to go up 25 basis points 7 or 8 times this year. You know.
So then, what happens? Do you think that causes some sort of 2008 type style, you know, collapse of the housing market in the U.S.?
No, I don't think so in the U.S. I think they're pretty resilient, and I don't think their prices have run up so crazy.
Right.
Like, we're seeing a 2008 style run up.
Right.
But you know, it's not, and this is why the fraud element I find is very, very interesting, you know, kind of resuming to that, or circling back to that conversation that I started with. You know, we're seeing that kind of stuff. We have like DIY ninja loans in Canada, right? Like,
explain that.
Well, like, I mean, people are just basically like making their own income documents, right? Like, everybody's like, oh, you know, ninja loans never existed. So ninja loan stands for no income, no job, no assets, right? In the States. And you know, those combined with option adjustable rate mortgages, like option arm mortgages in the States, as well as a couple of other subprime programs, are really what, you know, if you watch The Big Short, it describes it pretty accurately, I would say. You know, that's what poked a hole in that inflating housing market, and, you know, it was probably a bubble. In Canada, we have, you know, the price run up. we don't have subprime housing loans because we don't have 2,000 financial institutions like the US did. We have an oligopolistic banking system. But you're starting to see, at least this is what I've heard. I'm not participating in these things, so I don't know. But like, I hear all the time from other agents, like, oh, I'm like, oh, my client can't qualify. And they're like, yeah, we'll just get some, pay that so-and-so $500 to make a fake income document. And
really,
oh, this is like rampant. Like, it's like I've been really like vigorously trying to get
find
people
data?
I've been, everybody is asking me to do a Twitter space on this. And it's so interesting actually, because Terranet, they do like these like monthly things for people in the industry. That's like the land registry system.
Terranet. Okay.
And so their next one is on real estate fraud, or mortgage fraud, I think it is. But so, everybody wants to know what this, like, Sam Cooper, who wrote Willful Blindness. I'm not sure if you've read the book.
No. He's
sort of been involved in the conversation just in Twitter threads, and everybody's been asking me to try and get him to co-host a Twitter space with me. And I think that this is just like, it's the beginning of, or maybe the end of something that's like really, really ugly, and that will be written about, like, and everybody's gonna be like, yeah, the writing was on the wall, right? Like,
yeah, you can't really say otherwise. I mean, there's enough people, running around saying that the sky is falling.
Right. Yeah. And I think that like we've shifted to a consumer sentiment of fear around the housing economy in Canada. Like, it's unignorable that things can't stay the way that they are. Like, you've reached a point where basically if prices stay where they are, we're screwed, right? If prices keep growing, we're especially screwed. It might actually be the best case scenario for the entire Canadian economy if prices come down, and if they come down significantly.
Right.
At that point, like, I think that it's just a matter of time, right?
But what is the mechanism for that? So I've heard, and someone's got to look this up if it's right, that the Fed and the Bank of Canada hold something like 30% of mortgages.
Right. Yeah.
So what are they going to do? Are they going to foreclose? Like is the bank going to take all these houses?
I think that hopefully interest rates are what, I mean, there's a lot of padding. In the US, it's a little bit different because there's maybe not as much, but I don't see that. Again, it comes back to, like, I don't see them seeing a 50% correction. It's not hard for a 40% correction to happen in Canada. Like, people think it is. We saw it happen in York Region, right? Like in 2017. It wasn't that long ago.
Explain that, because I was in 2017. I was kind of really just looking in this bubble for a place for myself. Yeah.
So 2017, foreign investment was really driving the market. Luxury properties, places like York Region, Milton was doing like pretty strong there too. Oakville would have been a big one actually. I think they saw Oakville and Aurora, I believe, which coincidentally are the two highest income, I think, areas in Ontario. They saw the biggest peak to trough. I think it was about, one was 39 and one was 40%. Right?
Really?
Yeah.
And how quickly?
It happened from first week of April 2017 to August of 2017. But the reason that it happened, I would say, is that, so there were some just regular economic factors where you saw an opportunistic supply flood. Everybody was like, holy shit, my house is worth $1 million. I'm going to sell it. Whatever, I'll rent. I'll move to Texas. I'll move to Costa Rica, whatever. Like, if I'm a millionaire, right? But then I think that, what happened was the Wynne government instituted that non-resident speculation tax. And you saw...
So explain that.
Yeah, so basically they put 15% tax on anybody who was purchasing real estate from outside of the country. Okay. And it was easily circumventable, to be honest with you. It's circumvented regularly to this day, but it was a sentiment shift. It was saying, oh, damn, they're not going to prop this thing up forever, right? And so it took the market a while to find a bottom, and it traded sideways for like until basically just before COVID, when rates started decreasing again. And the same thing happened in Vancouver, where in 2016 they put in, I can't remember the name of their tax, but a foreign ownership tax. And the chart reads exactly the same as the Ontario one. And so from my perspective, and again, kind of circling back to that conversation about Trudeau now being in office until 2025, and Trudeau promising on his campaign that he was going to put in a foreign ownership ban, outright ban for I think they were saying 2 years. It's so weird. Like I talk to a lot of people about this, and a lot of people are like, yeah, it's not gonna do anything to the economy. I'm like, it's not gonna do anything to housing. I'm like, that's gonna decimate. We have two examples of how foreign ownership, just taxes, 50 and 20% taxes, decrease prices in specific markets. How is an outright ban on foreign ownership not going to completely destroy the house price? And I mean, I still don't understand the logic behind it, but I think that and it wouldn't surprise me, like, cause that's a pretty accessible policy. It's not hard to push that one across somebody's desk. I think that's kind of, like, that could be it, right? That could be what gives us a 50% sell off. And it doesn't mean, like, again, if you bought your house before COVID, you're okay.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
If you bought your house before COVID and prices come down 50%, as long as you didn't lever it up to go on vacation or something stupid like that, you're fine. So it's not like there's a ton of risk. They're just they're sacrificing everybody who did buy since COVID, or everybody who bought new, like, or bought for the first time since COVID. Anybody who sold and then bought during COVID is still okay, kind of.
Right. So in your mind, trying to get into the mind of these politicians, or even just, in general, the quicker they reverse what just happened, is that better?
I would say, I think if they want to, I don't think the next election is going to be decided by baby boomers. And if they want to win the next election, they're going to have to do something about it. And they need to win the hearts of millennials and Gen Z. And those two generations can't afford houses right now.
Right. I mean, it seems to me though that their only lever that they ever pull, like, so say this happens, that they collapse the market so that they win the political favor of first-time home buyers or Gen Z, and there's a recession caused by it.
Yeah.
Every time in my lifetime that there's been a recession, they just print money.
Yeah.
Do you not see that happening just again and starting the whole process over again?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, they said that they've suspended quantitative easing indefinitely, but I think I would say, even if we don't have a recession, give it 2 years, like, and they'll be back at it, right? Like, this is what I say, like, the monetary system is completely destroyed, right? Like, there's no, I don't understand, unless they can figure out a way to more efficiently deliver capital to the lower, or what they've now, like, the lower income people, because they don't have assets, right? It's basically just helicopter money or universal basic income. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if that was an extremely likely outcome in the next little bit, right? Because they've decimated, there's no middle class anymore in Canada.
Yeah.
It's people who are now asset rich and people who don't. Basically, you've divided the economy into people who own or don't own assets. There's nobody in the middle.
And it's funny, like, it felt like when we were young, growing up, traveling around Ontario was just middle class.
It was. We until COVID, we were a very middle class economy, and and I think that one of the challenges is maybe it's financial education, maybe it's, or just an encouragement on the credit side, but I think we were too much of a credit dependent economy. I think we had the highest household debt debt to disposable income in the world. I believe it was like 170% before COVID. I think it's over 200 now. Which is fine, because now inflation is inflating away that debt and also increasing the assets that was purchased with that debt, including cars, right? At this point, like,
it's insane.
Yeah. And so, but for people who were financially responsible and didn't lever up before COVID, they're screwed.
Yeah. So, no, they didn't. Yeah. They didn't roll the dice, but
right. Yeah.
I guess another talking point, I'll say, for the Trudeau government, was trying to, and I don't know, like, you'll know a lot better than I will, trying to end, they called it like the black box, kind of put your best foot forward, put your offer in, submit your offer, and it's blind bidding.
Yeah.
Are they going to do anything about that? Like, I guess Trudeau said he wanted to change that.
Yeah. I think it's pretty easy thing to do, right? It's not going to do anything. Like, Australia has auctions. Like, it might just remove the function of a buyer agent in Canadian real estate, which everybody would be happy about. Like, people hate realtors. If you can cut their fee in half, that'd be sweet.
Right.
But it's not going to make houses more affordable. If anything, it's going to make the person who's overpaying be like, it might eliminate the odd case where there's $100,000,
Well, I had a buddy trying to buy a farm up, like, north of Erin,
right?
And I think he put his offer in at list, and the guy who bought it paid $450,000 more than him,
right?
And it's just like,
how many offers were there? Do you know?
2.
Right. Yeah. So there you go. Like that. So that's,
if you found, like, if I found that out, I'd puke in a bucket.
Yeah. No, I know, and I've been in bidding wars where that's happened as well. That's all it'll get rid of, like, the odd. So it'll shave off the anomalies where, that one poor sap is overpaying. but it's not going to impact the market. If anything, like for every case like that, there's cases where they're neck and neck, and now all of a sudden you have, if I know that somebody else in the market is willing to pay $1 million, why wouldn't I pay $1,001, right? So you can almost like, it becomes this positive feedback loop.
Yeah, I guess, right? Because it has to be market value.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Have you heard of Unreserved?
Is it like, are they
yeah, they're doing that.
Yeah, okay. So I haven't heard of them, but I know On the Block is another company that's doing that. Katie Steinfeld.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and she's pretty active on Twitter. We talk quite a bit, and they're doing great work in that space.
Huh. That's interesting. So I guess I've only ever looked at the Unreserved model, and it's like, I guess they go in, they take 1 million pictures, they do an open house, and then they have live bidding online kind of thing in a certain amount of time. If the bidding's not done when the time limit hits, there's an extension. Is that the exact same model?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, very similar. And basically, like, the person selling their house at a reserve price, if it goes more, great. If not, then whatever, right? I mean, I think it's a very efficient way to sell real estate. But I mean, the 70,000 realtors in the Greater Toronto area, like, if you're gonna take the keys away from them to make their 5% or whatever, I mean, that might be the most likely uprising that we could see in Canada.
The realtor uprising.
See a bunch of white CLAs pull up on Parliament.
That's funny. Yeah. And I mean, I guess we got to get to that, because there's been it's amazing what realtors make. They're not being left behind by inflation. Their commission is being completely pegged to the house price.
It's a function of inflation.
Right? Like, they were still making the same percentage in 1955 as they are now.
Right.
And a house was $25,000 in 55, and now it's $2.5 million.
Yeah, I think that there's a bit of a hidden declining fee environment in that. Like, I would say that agents aren't making 2.5% on average. I would say they're probably making closer to half of that.
Are they squeezing themselves to get deals done?
Yeah, it's the nature of competition, right? Like, if I don't know, it's very rare that I'm going to list a property and I'm not competing with somebody, right? And so, yeah, I mean, sometimes you compete on price, right? Price is a pretty easy competitive advantage. Some of our econ professors might disagree with that, but it's an easy way to compete.
Right. Do you think, do you think that the government is going to implement something like that? Like, are they going to outlaw, blind bidding?
Yeah. No, I think it's probably the lowest policy that's from my perspective. I think that's probably the least likelihood. It's a low impact policy. I think OFC will increase the down payment requirements for investors, probably to 30-35%. I think that they'll
increase the down for investors. And how do you determine who's an investor?
It's a great question, right? I mean, like, again, it's as enforceable as this non-resident speculation tax. But to me, we're a sentiment-driven market. It communicates something, right? And once you start to erode that sentiment, if you see policy on top of policy designed to make housing more affordable, it's going to start making people say, maybe this thing's not going to go up forever. Maybe I should sell it. And when 50% of the market has that conversation with themselves, then that's how prices start coming down, right? You get to an excess supply situation.
So do you see I guess, take that aspect out of it, and then you go into, like I was saying earlier, how everyone seems to be on top of the housing market, and everything's becoming, data is becoming more accessible. Everyone's got an app for looking at the map of where they want to buy a house online. Soon all the sales data will be there. More and more of these websites will be there, where you can just live bid. Do you see the death of the residential realtor, or?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really do. I mean, I think
you're a residential realtor.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to be, but I just think that it's an arbitrage that exists in the market that shouldn't. And that arbitrage only exists because of an information asymmetry that has been encoded by the governing bodies, mostly, to be honest with you. I do some work on a data science startup that uses Toronto Real Estate Board's data as an example, and they actually constrict the feed. And Bungle would be another good example. That was an app that was publishing sold prices similar to House Sigma. Yep. I'm actually surprised they didn't go after House Sigma right after Bungle, but consumers can price their own house today. Like, seriously. So what was probably among the primary functions of a realtor is gone. Right now, you're basically paying a realtor, and you're paying them too much to basically put your property on the MLS.
Yep.
That's it, right? So if you can find somebody who's willing to sell a house and get the paperwork signed, like you can make, and you can repeat that process 10 or 20 times a year, which isn't really that hard. I mean, you could do it by picking up the phone and calling 25 people each day. You could make $250,000,
yep.
right? Very few agents are making $250,000, but you know, that's besides the point. I think that it will weed out. I think that we'll start to see this Darwinistic phenomena happening in the market where, you know, bad agents will be replaced by robots or people selling their properties themselves. Like, I actually think we're kind of already in having the Uberification of real estate happening, and that Uberification is what I was talking about, the declining fee environment, where agents know that they're doing basically nothing except putting a property on the market, and they're charging 0.5% to do it, right? And you know, people, like, if you're not getting any service, you know, you can book your own photographer, you can get your own stager, you can clean your own house, right? Like, you can paint it. Like, what other stuff is realtors doing? That's like why, to me, the data element is the competitive advantage, right? It's good advisory. When's the proper time to sell? Or, you know, all that other stuff, like actual qualitative advantages.
So you said you hope there's no such thing as residential realtors anymore.
Yeah.
What would you, and you hope you don't want to be one. Right. What do you want to do?
I don't know, honestly. I mean, I would love to have a more meaningful role in the housing market and solving housing affordability for Canadians, because I don't feel like the people trying to do it right now are capable of it. And I feel like I probably could do a decent job at it.
Do you think they're bound by politics though?
Yeah. And I think that a lot of them are blind to it, right? Like, I think that they are so out of touch with what's happening, right?
So do you think it's that they're just ideologically blind?
It's a good question. It's a really good question. Maybe. They think that their policies are designed to support the people that they're actually screwing.
Because of the names of their policies?
Maybe not even, yeah, I mean, maybe, but also, like, you know, it's like, we think that we're socializing affordable housing in Canada, and probably the only effective socialization that I've seen of affordable housing in Canada is that you can find a foreign investor to purchase a condominium in downtown Toronto, as an example, and lose money every month so that you or I could lease that condo for far less than it would cost to own it and live close to work. That's probably the only, like, money losing investors is the socialization of affordable housing in the Canadian real estate, because they've made renting that house cheaper than owning it, significantly cheaper than owning it.
So how does that work?
How do those people,
like, you know, you're an investor, you buy a condo building.
Yeah.
Why are you getting subsidized?
No. They're getting subsidized by capital appreciation, you know,
at least for the past
25 years. But I don't think most of them are doing it for that reason. I mean, I think that this is where you start to examine whether or not there's more sinister things happening in the Canadian real estate market, right? And again, to go back to Willful Blindness by Sam Cooper, if you read that book, like, I mean, money laundering, Canada's like the money laundering capital, from my perspective, of the world, probably. Like,
really?
Yeah, wouldn't surprise me, honestly. I think that, I mean, there's a reason we don't have a beneficial ownership registry, right?
What is that?
We don't know who actually owns the real estate.
Sure.
Right? Like, it's, you know, it can be a corp, a numco, whatever. I mean, it's a touchy subject, right? But it's one, from my perspective, especially now that we're seeing this divide in the world where you have, you know, China, India, Russia, all this stuff going on over there, right, in the East, and, you know, what's happening in sort of like the Western world. And I actually think that if anybody is going to create a beneficial ownership registry for Canadian real estate, I believe it would be the Chinese government. Because so you know, you hear this all the time, right? It's like you got a foreign investor and they want to buy a Canadian house, and because they want to get money away from the government. Like, you hear that.
Yes.
Right? Get money out of China.
Right.
So to me, the Chinese government has an incentive to know who owns Canadian real estate, right? The Canadian government doesn't have an incentive for Canadian people to know who owns Canadian real estate.
Right.
So I just think that's a very interesting, especially now that we're starting to see a lot of these, I don't know, economic warfare kind of things happening,
totally.
Right?
Yep.
That, to me, that's a very interesting vulnerability or point of that, where you could see some sort of information war happen.
So you think the Chinese government will create a registry for who owns?
I don't know if they will, but I think that they're the most likely person to do it. Yeah. I mean, at a certain point, they're going to want to repatriate that capital that we're hearing people want to escape China, right? If that's the case, then why wouldn't, realistically, or you need a government maybe that's more friendly with them, as an example, because I think they're starting to ridicule Justin Trudeau a little bit.
China.
China voted Canada like their least favorite country and stuff like that. And you saw their commentary from the Freedom Convoy, right? From
what
the
did
Chinese
he say
embassy. Well, the Chinese embassy was talking about just how Canada's accusing China of these human rights violations, and then they're doing it right in front of them or whatever. I don't know. I mean,
Kettle calling the pot black. Is that what they said?
It's just, I don't, you get, I think we're in such an interesting global political world right now. It's I don't find anything else entertaining except just watching governments talk shit to each other.
Yeah, no, it is true. I mean, so I guess to get to a more macro level, do you think the U.S. is losing its hold on their dollar being pegged to oil?
For sure.
Yeah,
I think they're losing their dollar. I think they're debasing themselves as a global currency. I think that. I mean, you're starting to see it already, right?
Where does that lead?
I mean, China is the global superpower, probably, realistically.
But you don't so it's people are concerned about the U.S. dollar because of the government stepping in and printing, 80%, 400% more than they had before, or an increase. You're equally concerned about China doing something crazy too. Right. So I can't see China becoming the reserve currency.
No, I think that probably will. I think that we'll see a major. I think that what will likely happen might not happen on the surface. I don't think it's gonna be like a depression, as an example, because I think that there's enough people with enough wealth that won't suffer. But I mean, you never know, because they're not immune to supply chain disruption or whatever. People in Lambos still sit in traffic, as an example, right? Mm-hmm. I think that there's probably a greater likelihood that you see. I don't like to be too conspiratorial, but some sort of collaboration around a bunch of world governments to build a better financial system with a world currency or whatever it is. It just seems like the most logical step from where we are, because everything else is just so fucked up, right? Yeah,
no, I don't disagree that. I mean, you'll definitely see an effort for that, I think, out of Europe and out of the US to try and and not rightfully so, but they have a valid argument in saying, hey, do you want China or Russia to be the currency superpower? Right.
But I think that conversation involves China. I think that China is in such I think that they're in such a strong position. I mean, they have 60% of the world's grain supply, something like that right now, right? They've made some really solid moves. They've funded most of the development in the developing world, Africa, Middle East, et cetera.
Funded, yeah.
Right, yeah. And so, now you have these countries that are just emerging as, I guess emerging markets, new economies, developing worlds, trying to get into the second, into the first world.
That are owned by China.
Functionally, yeah. I mean, they owe China something, some sort of, and so, I mean, I think that they have realized that the world, the new way to conquer is economically, right? And I think that they've built the best among the best. They did the best that they could, for sure, at building that group of kind of things that they needed to be very successful.
So I guess that's a factor. So I guess that's the U.S., them taking U.S. dollars as payment and then instantly being concerned about those U.S. dollars because of the money printing going on, right, and trading that for real assets,
right? Goods, yeah, commodities, whatever it is,
mines, right? And countries, and
right.
Interesting.
Canadian real estate.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's really, I don't know, I mean, it's just such an interesting time to be alive. I'm glad that I was here for it. Right.
Yeah. What else do we have here? Definitely have some more questions for you. Can you? Hear it all the time now. Can you explain the stress test?
Yeah, basically right now, if you want to buy a house, you have to qualify at your rate. So let's say you're going to get, I think today you're 3.5%, or maybe even higher, but 3.5%, I think it's plus 2, so 5.5%, or so you have to qualify at 5.5% or 5%. So it's a greater of 5 or 5.5.
Okay.
So let's say it's 5.5%. So your mortgage is it was going to cost you $2,000 a month, let's say, but if you had the same mortgage at 5.5%, then maybe it costs you $2,200 a month. They just re-underwrite your income or your ability to purchase that house with a different interest rate or with a higher interest rate.
So it's only the stress test is only the increase in interest rate. Is inflation included in that stress test, like your ability to pay? No,
it's a great question. No, it's not, right? Like it includes nothing, right? Like you can go, buy a house and then go buy a Lambo the next day and they don't know and you weren't stress tested for that thing, right? Or like you can go buy a house and then broccoli triples in value and now all of a sudden you can't afford to feed your family.
So you can't put much stock in the stress test.
No. And also I think that it uses an unrealistic rate, but it also doesn't account for things like, the majority of people who are really impacted by the stress test, which would be first-time home buyers, just because they're the ones who are using enough debt that, a 1% change in the rate actually reduces their buying power. Mm-hmm. We forget that a good portion of them, I think it's somewhere between 20 and 30%, are being co-signed by their parents, right? And then another 20 to 30% are getting gifted down payments by their parents to reduce the impact of the stress test because now they're buying with 20, 30% down or whatever. So again, it's when I say those things out loud, I'm those are going to make for great lines in the big short book of the Canadian real estate market. Combine that with, because they're oh yeah, we're just completely ignoring the fact that everybody's just circumventing these mechanisms that were in place. And that's not even fraudulent. That's just out in the open, right? But it's mom and dad are doing it. Now mom and dad are exposed to the deal. Yeah. Right. And you think mom and dad are going to, if prices start coming down, you think they're going to tell their son, Chad, to sell the house or hang on and try and refi in 3 to 4 years and get them off title, right? And that's what, we got to remember, mom and dad have been through the 90s, right? And they've been through the 80s. And so, it doesn't take much, I don't think, to shake Canadian real estate sentiment, especially when there's so much attention around real estate.
No, absolutely. So you want to get into a political career?
Yeah, I did. So when we were talking about it, having a more meaningful role in housing affordability, I think I might run for municipal politics this year. Originally,
is that what mayor of
Georgina?
Mayor of Georgina.
Yeah, I might do it. I don't know. I'm thinking about it.
Explain to someone in Florida where Georgina is.
Yeah, it's an hour north of Toronto on a lake. It's actually been known as the Florida of the GTA.
Oh, really?
Honestly. Oh, yeah. Georgina, especially Keswick, they're trying to get away from talking about Keswick, right? But Keswick was, I went to a private school in Aurora, so being the only Keswickian person there was I was just the butt of every joke. Right? I think about 2 decades ago, in the 90s, it was. What did you hear? It was bikers and booze hounds. I think it was what it was. That's what they used to call Keswick.
Keswick, okay.
Yeah, it was a biker town, and it was the affordable housing capital of the GTA. And I think that it would be beautiful for it to resume that role. I really do. Actually, I think it would be very poetic, right? And I think that it's easy to solve affordable housing at a municipal level. I don't think it's easy to do it at a provincial or national level. Sure. But at a municipal level, I could expedite the development supply chain overnight, right?
How would you do that? I
would blanket upzone the entire town to its secondary plan designation.
So explain that.
So a town has an official plan, right? So that's what you can do with the property. So it's a map, let's say, where it tells you, here's 100 acres, you can put a subdivision there, or that one's for farming or whatever. And then there's, on top of that, is this thing called the secondary plan. And so the secondary plan is basically a collaboration between the province and the municipality. So the province says, hey, town, you have this land inventory in order to meet your Places to Grow Act targets. So, because of immigration, 400 or 250,000 people are going to move to the GTA next year. You need to account for 10,000 of those people. In order to do that, you need to build 10,000 or 5,000 houses per year. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, here's how we recommend you use your existing land inventory. And so they create these secondary plans that are basically maps that have, rather than hey, you can use this for farming today. It says, hey, you should use this to build a 4-story building. You should use this parcel to build a 6-story building. And they're all strategically located, like, you know, there's density cores and corridors and whatever, you know, they make use of where the existing water and sewer infrastructure is. They make use of where the major arterial roads are, et cetera. That plan already exists. The infrastructure's there. Like it to me, so to explain why it would be impactful is today you go buy a piece of land and it's regulated as of right. You could build whatever is within the official plan. So if you want to go get building permits and build a farm, right? Like, because that's all you can do with your piece of land, then you can go do that. But if you want to change it to what's recommended in the secondary plan by the province and agreed upon by the municipality, you have to go through a zoning bylaw amendment process.
Right.
And anybody who's in the real estate space knows that process takes probably at a minimum 2 years.
Yeah.
And it costs you probably at a minimum about $250,000. That's fine if you're building a 50-story condo building in downtown Toronto. It's not fine if you're trying to put 4 units on the Queensway in Keswick, Ontario, right? Yep. Because it instantly destroys the capital, like, or the economics of the deal, and 2, it takes too long. So you've completely disincentivized infill development. So it's a pretty easy way to re-incentivize infill development is just say, now you can do that as of right. Come pick up your building permit. Show me a 4-story building that meets all of the requirements outlined in the secondary plan, and you can build it the day after you submit your architectural drawings and somebody stamps it.
And are you as mayor, are you able to do that? Do you know?
I don't know, honestly, okay. But I would assume that you could. Yeah, it would just be a motion to basically adopt the official plan, and interestingly, most official plans need to be reviewed, right? So they need to be reviewed and updated to be like, it's part of the legal framework that allows municipalities permission to continue regulating their land, which again, provincial government's trying to take that permission away. And I think that's probably the best thing to do. But I would just say the official plan's gone. Secondary plan is the official plan, right?
Right.
During that review process, which I believe is happening this year. A couple other things I would do. Probably I would rebate development charges to first-time home buyers.
Okay.
Right. I think that's a pretty easy. You look at like brands like Budweiser or something like that, right?
Yeah.
They try and get consumers very early on in their consumer lifespan because they know, if you build brand loyalty, they're stuck with you, right?
Yep.
And if I did that to Keswick, right, then I can literally buy a consumer, because when a developer builds a house, they have to pay, like, let's say $60,000 to the municipality, the region, the province for permission to do that. It's called the development charge. It's a type of tax. If I give that back to the buyer, not only have I made the house way more accessible for them to purchase, but I've also increased the value of the house by probably that much. So everybody else in the town benefits from property values going up. So, I mean, that's an easy selling point, right? Mm-hmm. And that's just a budget decision, really. Another thing I'd like to do is allow individuals to vote with their dollars on a regular basis. So if you pay your property tax, you fill out a survey with it, and you get to determine your own budget. I don't think a lot of people would do it at the beginning, but I'd be interested. I think it'd just be a very interesting social experiment.
So if you're paying your property tax is the same as it normally is,
right? But then
what do you do? Check off where it goes?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Maybe it's a pie chart. Maybe it's like whatever. You just say, I want 10% to go to roads. I want 10% to go to whatever school. I want 10% to go to affordable housing, right? Like whatever it is. And I don't know.
I've said this for a long time. I mean,
I don't know why. Yeah. Like it's so easy to decentralize. I think that participation would be low. That's probably the biggest downfall.
You think?
I don't know. I mean, let's find out.
Yeah. Well, I think you could get enough of a campaign going. Like as long as you had a couple viral videos of people checking off where their tax dollars go. Yeah. That's exciting stuff.
Yeah. I think, like, I don't believe in big government, and I think municipal governments are probably the epitome of governments that are too large. And so, the couple of things that I just mentioned, one would functionally make municipal planning obsolete. Mm-hmm. So, you save a lot of money there. But the other one, I think that I believe in citizens' ability to govern themselves. I really do. Right. Like, and I think that, once you give people a taste of what libertarianism is, even on a small scale, that's socially impactful, right? I mean, yeah. And so to me, like originally I just wanted to run for mayor to use it as a megaphone, because I think that I've gotten some pretty good attention around the housing affordability conversation for young Canadians. And that was kind of my primary objective, to be honest. And maybe that's wrong to do that, but I'm likely going to anyway. But the reality is, if people like what I'm saying, then I'll accidentally get voted mayor. And maybe that's for the best, right? Because beyond the couple of ways that I believe we can solve housing at a municipal level, I would trust my constituents probably to make the remainder of decisions. And I don't know exactly how you do that, but I'd like to figure that out too.
Right.
The other, one piece I didn't mention, like when we're talking about a beneficial ownership registry in Canadian real estate, I think that would easily be executed at a municipal level as well. Like I'd like to actually build maybe a blockchain land registry.
Okay.
For a small town, right?
Yeah.
And it's easy to do for, like, Georgina has like 30,000 dwellings, right? And create a beneficial ownership registry. I think citizens have the right to know who their neighbors are, realistically, sure. Right? And I think that, like, to me, those are things where you can say to the world, right? Like, hey, I can solve these problems at a small scale. It's not that hard to solve them at a big scale, right? But I don't really have an interest in being involved in politics beyond that.
No, fair enough. I mean, yeah, as far as I want to be involved in politics, it's just having conversations. I think that's...
Yeah, honestly, same. And that's like kind of why I wanted to do it, was just like have conversations that had more attention around them. Because I feel like I've just gotten good at really wanting to know more about certain issues and like really understanding it. And yeah, so that to me is maybe the best way to do it.
No, absolutely. You're definitely going to, you're going to hear where you screw up. That's for sure.
I figure like it's either I like maybe get elected or I get canceled, right? So, but whatever.
Do you think you'll have much pushback, from the people saying, hey, this guy is going to, whether it's true or not, we can have a later discussion about zoning, but like, hey, this guy's just going to build whatever 50-story buildings here. Like he's going to, not in my backyard crew. Yeah. Are they going to give you a run for your money, or do you have answers to them? I
don't really have answers to NIMBYs. Honestly, I don't think that they really need to be answered. Honestly, I think that most of them are just looking for attention, and I would actually just not give them that. Yeah, like I don't know. There's so much negative energy out there. Like it's just like you're best to avoid that.
Are you say I guess if it's in the secondary plan, you don't really have to worry about the OMB striking it down.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, although within that housing task force, they're going to make it so that NIMBYs basically have to pay a fee to take somebody to the OMB, which is kind of cool.
What? Hang on. So in what? In the recent?
In the Provincial Affordable Housing Task Force report, they've basically tried to make it so that if a NIMBY wants to challenge a development proposal and take it to the Ontario Municipal Board, they have to pay a fee of, I think it was $10,000.
Really?
Yeah. So, you're giving more power to rich NIMBYs. And no, but I don't, I think that, my response to any NIMBY would just be, if you can propose a better solution to how, like this is what I think is really interesting about where we are at socially in the world. You're getting to the point where people with different social causes that they're passionate about are now at cross purposes with one another, because we've been divided by our politics, our media, whatever it is. So a NIMBY, as an example, is somebody who maybe wants to protect the heritage of their area, right? Sure. But, they're now arguing with somebody who is passionate about providing homes for the homeless people or homes for refugees, right? And so these people they're both, they both have a right to have that discourse, but I think that the more that you can have conversations with people of opposing viewpoints and civilized conversations, then people start to understand one another. Like, and I don't know if I would be necessarily the right person but I would say, and I think that the same thing happens with development between environmentalists and affordable housing, right? Right.
You're both looking out. You're like in the sentiment is you're both looking out for the people who can't, or believe, or those people believe that they can't look out for themselves, right, as well. One being, the trees and the frogs and the owls and the land, and the other being, the people who should be in low income housing.
Right.
And they the problem is if you're looking at, say, the same piece of land, those are mutually exclusive things.
Yeah.
You know, the NIMBY or the person, you know, they don't, maybe they do realize, I don't know, and they just don't care, but they're driving up the cost of each housing unit.
Right.
And that only hurts the least amongst us.
Right. But I mean, they probably don't care, right? Like right now, I think in Toronto, there's a big protest going on about like a shelter. Like it's like literally like a NIMBY protest where they don't want like a homeless shelter in their neighborhood. And it's like, oh, we don't bring drug addicts here and stuff like that. And it's like, it's just crazy to me that, you know, at the same time that like people who are trying to have like good social discourse about, you know, topics that some people might be not happy to hear about, you can have things like that happening at the same time, because like these are very much people who would be participating in the canceling or whatever, but then they can go and just say like everyone who lives in a homeless shelter and affordable housing is a drug addict and I don't want them in my neighborhood. Yeah. Like I just think that it's, you know, I actually think that the further that either political extreme gets, the more they start to fight amongst themselves, and it starts to destabilize a little bit. And I think you're starting to see that a little bit on the left, and I think you're starting to see it a little bit on the right. Where, you know, and that's probably a good thing, because then like, you know, they end up maybe just self-regulating or wasting their time on one another rather than, you know, trying to pull more people in and you know, make more or like get further along the extreme, or, you know, and so like, but it's just so interesting to me, especially around the housing piece that we've gotten there. Cause I think like there's so many distinct groups that are fighting against housing that it's not even like, it's not even the, you know, and I guess it comes back to that, like the ideology, right? Political ideology. It's like, what matters more? Does, you know, healthy, safe neighborhoods matter more to the liberal agenda, or does ecological protection, does the Greenbelt matter more to the liberal agenda, or does being able to house more homeless people matter more? And so I do think like that's where the ideological challenges come in, and not so much in what they choose to decide, because they can change their mind whenever they want and there's really no consequences, but in what they tell their constituents to value, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So when's the next election?
Well, I think municipal elections are this year. That's kind of why, like, I've been thinking about it for a long time. And then, like, just because of a lot of the attention that I've got on social media and stuff around the housing issue. And I think that the majority of elections, like, I think the provincial elections are this year. I mean, now we know the federal election is not for 2025. Yep. I think both municipal and provincial elections will be primarily on housing platforms. If that's a conversation that I start to see evolving, I'll jump in. If not, then I don't really have much value to participate in beyond housing. Right. And so that to me is kind of where, but I do think that, like, you know, as we're starting to see small towns develop, I think you need people who are going to be part of the population living in them for the next several decades, right? For sure.
What kind of, like, I don't know anything about municipal mayors. Like, what are you expected to work 5 days a week?
I'm not sure, honestly, but I would.
Yeah.
Like I would work 7 days a week. Like, I'm no stranger to 100-hour work weeks.
Sure.
I mean, actually, I don't know if that's mathematically possible, but like 80 hours, you know, like investment banker hours.
Yeah. And I don't know this. Is it your family brokerage that you work for?
Yeah, we're not actually a brokerage, but just like a team, I guess you would call it. But I actually don't know. Again, like, this is probably one of those things I would just really pay attention to what my constituents were saying. Like, if they were like, oh yeah, I mean, do you really have enough time if you're going to be in real estate? Then I'd be like, oh, I mean, it's a good question. Let me think about it a little bit. And like, maybe we can work together on coming up with a good response to that question. Cause I mean, you also run the risk of like conflict of interest too, right? Like if, you know, like if we're representing developer clients or whatever and bringing them into the, you know, I mean, I'm fine to do that as a mayor out in the open as an example, if that was what I was doing, but I don't know if it's appropriate to, you know, to do that, like to monetize those relationships if I'm doing, you know what I mean? So like the last thing I would want to do is be like, I think that if you really want to be impactful as a politician, you want to stay away. Like, if the fewer stories you have about that shit, you know, you don't want the conversation to be around that. You want it to be around, you know, like the things that you're doing. I want people to pay attention to the stuff that matters.
Right. And then would you run as an independent, or would you run?
Yeah, there's no political parties in municipal elections.
Oh, right.
Yeah. I know, like, I think I'm probably pretty politically central. I think. Sure. I think I'm more libertarian than anything. And like, so my goal would be to basically say like, how do we give people more power, especially at a municipal level? I think it's easiest to start there, and then you can kind of grow it out from there. Because I think that we're in when we talk about decentralization of the workplace, like I think we're in an era of decentralization of politics. Like
I agree.
The tools are there, the infrastructure is there. It's just somebody needs to start pushing it in the right direction. I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet. So I'd be really happy to be one of those people.
Right on. That's a good place to end it.
Yeah, it is.
Tell people where they can find you. You're on frickin' everything.
Yeah, I am. Just probably Instagram's the easiest place to start, or just danielfoch.com, and then you can, like, all my links are there. But yeah, Instagram Daniel Foch, Twitter Daniel_Foch. Those are probably like really the places that I'm most active. I've been like trying with some of the other stuff, YouTube and TikTok and stuff, but I don't know. I don't do exceptionally well on them, so I kind of just stick to what I'm good at. Yeah.
And you still do a podcast?
Yeah, I do a podcast. You can find it on all of those platforms, but the podcast is on all the major platforms. It's called Brick and Mortar, or Canadian Real Estate by Brick and Mortar, and so it's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. Yeah, and it's cool. We just talk about like mostly just real estate issues, and I don't know, talk to realtors and talk to mortgage brokers and just anything that is interesting and in depth and adds to the conversation around real estate in Canada is what we talk about.
Right on.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for coming out, man.
Thanks for having me.
That was Dan Foch. Man, lots to think about. I don't pretend to be an expert in any of these topics. I probably got confused on a bunch of different concepts and mixed things up. But I think more and more that these topics are becoming relevant in our everyday lives, not just as a Canadian, but as a global citizen. And I think that they're worth trying to better understand, and at least trying to better understand what the right questions are to ask. So I'll see you guys next week. Peace.